The school bell rang, sharp and piercing, slicing through the humid Austin morning. Emily Parker, 32, stood by her minivan, her hand shielding her eyes from the Texas sun as her kids, Mia, 8, and Ethan, 6, scrambled out with backpacks bouncing. "Hurry, you'll be late," she called, her voice warm but edged with the strain of another chaotic morning. She waved them off, watching them disappear into the crowd of kids streaming toward the elementary school entrance. For a moment, she lingered, her fingers tightening around the car keys. This was her life, always moving, always giving, always holding it together. But lately, it felt like she was the only one trying. Back at home, the dishes from breakfast sat in the sink, a silent reminder of the morning rush. Emily's husband, Mark, 35, had already left for his tech job downtown, his goodbye a distracted grunt as he grabbed his laptop bag and bolted out the door. No kiss, no how's your day. Just the same routine that had calcified over 9 years of marriage. Emily didn't expect anything else anymore. She loaded the dishwasher, her movements mechanical, her mind replaying the same question that had haunted her for months. When did I become invisible? She wasn't always this way. Back in college, Emily had been the one with big dreams, writing novels, traveling, living a life that felt alive. But after Mia was born, those dreams got shelved. Mark's career took off, and Emily took on the house, the kids, the endless appointments and school events. She didn't mind at first. She loved her kids fiercely and believed in the partnership she and Mark had promised each other at the altar. But over time, that partnership eroded. Mark's late nights at the office became later. His "I'm too tired" became a mantra. When she tried to talk, he'd cut her off. "You're home all day, Em. Can't you handle it?" The words stung, but she swallowed them, convincing herself it was just a phase. This morning, though, something felt heavier. Maybe it was the way Mark didn't even glance at her when she asked if he'd be home for dinner. Maybe it was the way her reflection in the kitchen window looked like a stranger's, tired, hollow, a woman who'd forgotten how to smile for herself. She shook it off and drove back to the school for a parent-volunteer meeting, her one outlet outside the house. As she parked, she noticed Diego Morales, 34, a single dad she'd seen at drop-offs. He was leaning against his truck, scrolling through his phone, his posture relaxed in a way that stood out among the harried parents. His son, Lucas, darted out of the truck, and Diego called after him with a laugh. "Don't forget your lunch, champ." Emily smiled despite herself. Diego's ease caught her off guard. Most mornings, she was too busy corralling her own kids to notice anyone else, but Diego had a way of standing out without trying. He caught her eye and waved, a small gesture that felt oddly personal. "Rough morning?" he asked as she approached, his voice carrying a hint of smile. "You could say that," Emily replied, tucking a stray hair behind her ear. "You ever feel like you're running a marathon with no finish line?" Diego chuckled, his eyes crinkling. "Every day. Lucas keeps me on my toes, but I wouldn't trade it." He paused, then added, "You're at every school event, Emily. How do you do it all?" The question hit her like a jolt. When was the last time someone noticed her effort? Mark certainly didn't. "I just keep going," she said, her voice softer than she intended. Diego nodded, like he understood more than she'd said. Their chat was brief, cut short by the meeting, but as Emily walked away, she felt a spark she hadn't in years. Someone had seen her. Over the next week, their encounters became a quiet rhythm. Diego was always there at drop-off, his easy smile a contrast to the chaos of Emily's mornings. They swapped stories about their kids, Mia's science fair project, Lucas's obsession with soccer. Diego listened, really listened, asking questions that made Emily feel like her words mattered. One morning, as they lingered by the school gate, he said, "You're kind of superhero. Most people would have cracked under all you do." Emily laughed, but her chest tightened. "Superhero? More like a robot on autopilot." She meant it as a joke, but the truth in her words hung between them. Diego's gaze softened, and for a moment, she felt exposed. Not in a bad way, but like someone was finally peering past the mask she wore. At home, the contrast was stark. Mark came home late again, dropping his bag on the couch and heading straight for the TV. Emily served dinner, the kids chattering about their day, but Mark barely engaged. "How was work?" she tried, setting a plate in front of him. "Fine," he muttered, eyes on the screen. "Long day." She waited for him to ask about her day, her meeting, anything. He didn't. The silence was louder than any argument. That night, As she lay in bed next to him, his snores filling the room, Emily stared at the ceiling. She thought about Diego's words, his attention, the way he made her feel like a person again. It was dangerous, she knew, but the ache in her chest, the loneliness that had become her constant companion, was louder than her caution. The next morning, Diego was waiting at the school gate, holding 2 coffees. "Thought you could use this," he said, handing her one. Their fingers brushed, and Emily's heart skipped. It was just coffee, just a moment, but it felt like a lifeline. As they talked, the schoolyard fading into the background, Emily realized something terrifying. She was starting to look forward to these moments more than anything else in her day. And that realization, small as it was the first crack in the life she'd built. A crack that would soon threaten to bring it all crashing down. Emily's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, the screen lighting up with Diego's name. Her pulse quickened as she glanced at Mark, who was slouched on the couch, scrolling through his phone, oblivious. She grabbed the device and slipped into the hallway, her thumb hesitating before opening the message. "Coffee tomorrow after drop-off? Lucas wants to show Mia his new soccer ball." Simple, innocent, yet it sent a thrill through her. She typed back, "Sure, sounds good." The words felt like a step onto a tightrope, exhilarating and reckless. The next morning, Austin's heat was already climbing as Emily parked at the school. She spotted Diego by the gate, his son Lucas kicking a soccer ball with Mia. Diego waved her over, his grin disarming. "You're late," he teased, handing her a coffee. "Had to keep these two from starting a World Cup match." Emily laughed, the sound foreign to her own ears. Mia's already planning her victory speech. They stood together, watching the kids play, their conversation flowing easily. School projects, parenting hacks, the chaos of single dad life for Diego. He mentioned his divorce in passing. No bitterness, just a quiet acceptance that made Emily wonder what it felt like to let go so cleanly. She envied it. Her own marriage felt like a knot she couldn't untangle. Back home, the day dragged. Mark was at work, the kids at school, and Emily tackled the endless cycle of chores. But her mind kept drifting to Diego, his questions, his warmth, the way he noticed her. She caught herself smiling at the memory of their chat, then shook her head. "This is nothing," she told herself. "Just a friend." But when her phone buzzed again, a photo of Lucas and Mia laughing on the school field, captioned "Future Champs," she couldn't stop the warmth spreading through her chest. Over the next 2 weeks, their coffee meetups became a ritual. They'd linger after drop-off at a small cafe near the school, the kids' chatter fading into the background. Diego shared stories of his life before Austin, his dreams of opening a community soccer program. Emily found herself opening up too, admitting how Mark's distance left her feeling like a single parent. "I don't even know who I am anymore," she said one morning, stirring her coffee. "It's like I'm just the mom, the wife, the one who keeps it all running." Diego leaned forward, his voice steady. "You're more than that, Emily. You're the one holding it all together. That's not nothing." His words landed like a lifeline, pulling her from the fog of her routine. She looked away, her throat tight, afraid he'd see how much it meant. At home, Mark's indifference grew sharper. He missed Ethan's soccer game, claiming a work emergency. When Emily asked him to help with the kids' bedtime, he sighed, "Can't you handle it? I'm beat." She swallowed her frustration, but it simmered. That night, she texted Diego, "Rough day. Thanks for the coffee earlier." His reply came fast. "Anytime. You deserve a break." The words felt like a secret, one she tucked away but couldn't ignore. The turning point came on a Friday. Diego suggested they skip the cafe and take the kids to a nearby park after school. Emily hesitated. Mark wouldn't notice, but it felt like crossing a line. She agreed anyway, telling herself it was just for the kids. At the park, Mia and Lucas ran ahead, leaving Emily and Diego on a bench, their shoulders close. The air was thick with the scent of grass and possibility. "You ever think about starting over?" Diego asked, his voice low, like he was testing the waters. Emily's breath caught. "Every day," she admitted, her eyes on the kids. "But it's not that simple." "It could be," he said, his hand brushing hers on the bench. The touch was brief, electric, and she didn't pull away. Her heart pounded as she met his gaze, seeing something she hadn't felt in years. Desire, not just for her body, but for her. The moment stretched, heavy with unspoken choices. Then Mia's shout broke the spell, calling them to the swings. That night, Emily lay awake beside Mark, his snores a steady rhythm. She replayed the park, Diego's touch, the way her skin hummed. Guilt gnawed at her, but so did something else. Anger. Anger at Mark for checking out, at herself for letting her life shrink to this. She grabbed her phone and texted Diego, "Today was nice. Can we do it again?" His reply was instant. Name the time. The next week, their meetings grew bolder. A quick lunch while the kids were at a school event. A late text about nothing, just to keep the conversation going. Emily knew she was slipping, but Diego's attention was a drug. Each dose made her feel alive, seen, wanted. She started hiding her phone, making vague excuses to Mark about errands. He didn't question her, too absorbed in his own world to notice her pulling away. But Mark wasn't as oblivious as she thought. One evening, as Emily cleared the dinner table, he glanced up from his phone, his eyes narrowing. "You've been out a lot lately," he said, his tone flat but pointed. Emily froze, her heart racing. "Just school stuff," she lied, avoiding his gaze. He didn't push, but the air felt different, like a storm gathering on the horizon. At the next drop-off, Diego waited by his truck, his smile softer than usual. "You okay?" he asked, sensing her tension. She nodded, but her hands trembled as she handed him coffee. "Just a lot going on," she said. He stepped closer, his voice low. "If you need to talk, I'm here." His hand grazed her arm, and for a second, she wanted to tell him everything. Her crumbling marriage, her fear, her longing. Instead, she smiled and stepped back, the weight of her choices pressing harder. That afternoon, in Diego's car after a quick coffee run, the line blurred. They were parked in a quiet lot, the kids still at school. The conversation turned personal, raw. "I haven't felt this way in a long time," Diego admitted, his eyes locked on hers. Emily's breath hitched. Before she could think, he leaned in, and she met him halfway. The kiss was slow, desperate, a release of everything she'd held back. When they pulled apart, guilt flooded her, but so did a reckless freedom. She was in too deep, and the tightrope was fraying. Emily's heart pounded as she pulled away from Diego's kiss, the taste of coffee and regret lingering on her lips. The quiet parking lot outside the Austin Cafe felt like a bubble, shielding them from the world, but only for a moment. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a sharp reminder of the life waiting for her. She glanced at the screen, a text from Mark. "Home early. Where are you?" Her stomach dropped. She typed a quick lie, picking up groceries, and turned to Diego, her voice shaky. "I have to go." Diego nodded, his eyes searching hers. "You sure you're okay?" he asked, his hand still resting on the car door, close enough to feel the heat of him. She forced a smile, muttering, "Yeah, just running late." But as she drove home, the weight of what she'd done settled like a stone in her chest. She'd crossed a line, and there was no undoing it. At home, Mark was already on the couch, his laptop open, his expression unreadable. Emily busied herself unpacking the few groceries she'd grabbed to cover her story, avoiding his gaze. "Long day?" he asked, his tone casual but edged with something she couldn't place. "Yeah, school stuff," she said, her voice too bright. He didn't respond, but his silence felt heavier than usual, like he was watching her every move. Over the next few days, Emily tried to act normal, but the guilt gnawed at her. She threw herself into her routine, driving Mia and Ethan to school, volunteering at the library, cooking dinners Mark barely touched. But Diego's texts kept coming, each one a pull back to that moment in his car. "Missed you a drop-off," he wrote one morning. She stared at the message, her thumb hovering, torn between deleting it and replying. She typed, "Missed you too," then erased it, her hands shaking. She couldn't stop, but she couldn't keep going either. Mark's behavior shifted subtly. He started asking questions, where she'd been, why she was late, who she was texting. His tone stayed calm, but his eyes were sharp, like he was piecing together a puzzle. Emily brushed it off, blaming her nerves, but the tension in the house grew thick. One night, as she tucked the kids into bed, Mark lingered in the doorway. "You've been distracted," he said, his voice low. "Everything okay?" "Fine," she snapped too quickly. He raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, retreating to the living room. Emily's heart raced. Was he suspicious, or was she just paranoid? She didn't know, but the walls of her life felt like they were closing in. The affair with Diego escalated quietly. They stole moments after school drop-offs, meeting in his car or at a park far from their neighborhood. Each encounter was a rush, his touch, his whispers, the way he made her feel wanted. But the thrill came with a cost. Emily started slipping, forgetting to sign Mia's permission slip, missing a parent-teacher call. The kids noticed her distraction, Ethan asking, "Mom, why are you always on your phone?" She brushed it off with a laugh, but the guilt was a constant ache. Mark, meanwhile, was paying attention. He'd always been detached, but now he was observant, cataloging details Emily didn't realize she was leaving behind. Her phone, once left carelessly on the counter, was now always in her hand or pocket. Her errands took longer, her excuses vaguer. One evening, as she washed dishes, he asked, "You're volunteering again tomorrow?" His tone was neutral, but his eyes locked on hers. She nodded, her throat tight, and changed the subject. He didn't push, but the air felt charged, like a storm about to break. The truth came crashing down on a Wednesday morning. Emily was in the kitchen, pouring coffee, when Mark walked in, his face calm but cold. "Can I see your phone?" he asked, holding out his hand. Her heart stopped. "Why?" she stammered, clutching the device. "Just need to check something," he said, his voice steady but unyielding. She hesitated, her mind racing for an excuse, but his stare pinned her. Reluctantly, she handed it over, her hands trembling. Mark scrolled through her messages, his expression unchanging. Emily stood frozen, watching as he opened her text with Diego. Every word, every plan, every moment laid bare. Messages about meeting at the park, about missing each other, about feelings she'd never meant to put into words. She wanted to explain, to beg, but the silence was suffocating. After what felt like an eternity, Mark closed the phone and set it on the counter. "We're done," he said, his voice flat, devoid of anger or pain. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there, the world tilting beneath her feet. Emily's knees buckled, and she sank into a chair, her breath shallow. She'd expected yelling, tears, something, but his calm was worse. It was final. That afternoon, she learned the depth of his resolve. A friend from the neighborhood texted her, saw Mark meeting with a guy at a coffee shop. Looked serious. Emily's stomach churned. She called Diego, her voice frantic, but he was calm, almost too calm. "We'll figure out," he said, but his words fell hollow. The next day, Mark was gone before breakfast, leaving a note, taking the kids to school. "We'll talk later." Emily spent the day in a daze, replaying every choice that led her here. When Mark returned that evening, he didn't look at her. "I hired a private investigator," he said, his voice low. "I've known for weeks." The words hit like a punch. He'd been gathering evidence, photos, texts, timestamps of her meetings with Diego. "I'm filing for divorce," he added, walking away before she could respond. Emily stood alone in the kitchen, the hum of the fridge the only sound. Everything she tried to hold together, her marriage, her family, her life, was unraveling. Diego's text stopped coming that night, and when she called, he didn't answer. The bubble had burst, and the fallout was just beginning. Emily stood in the empty kitchen, the divorce papers trembling in her hands. Mark's signature was a stark, black scrawl across the page, finalizing the end of their 9-year marriage. The Austin morning was quiet, the kids already at school, but the silence felt like a scream. She'd lost everything, her home, her family, her sense of self, and the weight of her choices crushed her. Mark had moved out 2 weeks ago, taking Mia and Ethan to his new apartment across town. The house, once filled with their laughter, now echoed with regret. The confrontation had been the spark that ignited the collapse. After Mark uncovered her affair with Diego, he'd acted with ruthless precision. His private investigator had compiled the dossier, text logs, photos of her and Diego in his car, timestamps of their park meetups. In court, the evidence was damning. Mark won primary custody of the kids, citing Emily's unstable behavior. Alimony was minimal. The judge ruled she could support herself. Emily didn't fight it. She couldn't. The shame was too heavy, and the truth was undeniable. She moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on the edge of Austin, the kind of place where the walls were thin and the neighbors kept to themselves. Her days were a blur of job applications and packing up the life she'd lost. Mia and Ethan's visits were brief, supervised by a court-appointed worker. Their questions, "Why can't we live with you, Mom?" cut deeper than any argument with Mark. She tried to explain, keeping it vague, but their confused glances told her they sensed the fracture. Diego was another casualty. After Mark's discovery, Emily had expected Diego to stand by her, to fight for what they'd started. Instead, he pulled back. His texts became sporadic, his excuses flimsy. "This is too much right now," he said during their last call, his voice distant. "I need space." She hung up, stunned, realizing he'd been an escape, not a future. Alone in her apartment, she deleted his number, the final thread of that fantasy snapping. The community didn't let her forget. At the school, parents she'd once called friends avoided her at pickup. Whispers followed her to the grocery store. That's the one who cheated. Her old life, the PDA meetings, the neighborhood barbecues, was gone. Even her sister, who lived an hour away, kept calls short, her tone clipped with judgment. Emily felt like a pariah, her mistakes branding her in a way she couldn't erase. Mark, meanwhile, moved on with startling ease. He'd started dating Laura, a co-worker from his tech firm, within weeks of the separation. Laura was warm, organized, and quick to bond with Mia and Ethan. She'd pick them up from school, help with homework, even post photos of their outings on social media, smiling, carefree moments that Emily could only watch from afar. The kids talked about Laura during their visits, their voices bright with stories of her baking cookies or taking them to the zoo. Each word was a knife, twisting deeper. Emily tried to rebuild. She landed a part-time job as a teacher's aide at a different school, far from the one where she'd met Diego. The work was exhausting but grounding, giving her purpose. She started therapy, a court-mandated step to maintain visitation rights. In those sessions, she unraveled the years of neglect in her marriage, her own role in its collapse, and the desperation that led her to Diego. "I thought he saw me," she told her therapist, her voice cracking. "But I was just running for myself." One afternoon, while volunteering at a community center, Emily overheard a conversation that stopped her cold. Two mothers at the school gate were talking about Mark. "He's with Laura now, but he's the same," one said. "Always on his phone, barely helps her out. She's practically raising those kids alone." The words hit Emily like a jolt. Mark hadn't changed. The detachment that drove her away was now Laura's burden. For the first time, Emily felt a flicker of something like clarity. She wasn't the only one who'd suffered his neglect. But clarity didn't erase the consequences. Mia and Ethan's visits grew shorter, their affection more reserved. Emily clung to those moments, baking their favorite cookies, reading bedtime stories, try to rebuild what she'd broken. Yet the gap between them widened. Mark's lawyer pushed for reduced visitation, arguing Emily's instability was a risk. She fought back, scraping together money for a lawyer, but the court battles drained her. Each hearing was a reminder of how far she'd fallen. Diego reappeared once, texting her out of the blue. "Can we talk?" She stared at the message, her thumb hovering. Part of her wanted to lash out, to demand why he'd abandoned her. But she didn't reply. She was done chasing shadows. Instead, she focused on the kids, on her job, on the small steps toward a new life. At night, alone in her apartment, she'd scroll through old photos of Mia and Ethan, their smiles a painful reminder of what she'd lost, but also what she was fighting to regain. Mark's life, meanwhile, wasn't as perfect as it seemed. Laura, initially charmed by his quiet confidence, started noticing the cracks. He'd come home from work, drop his bag, and sink into the couch, eyes glued to his phone. When she asked for help with the kids or chores, he'd shrug, saying, "You've got this." Her frustration grew, but Mark didn't see it. He was too comfortable, too blind to the patterns repeating themselves. Laura started spending more time texting a coworker, her laughter soft and secretive, a mirror of Emily's past. Emily didn't know about Laura's struggles, but she sensed the tide turning. One evening, during a rare, unsupervised visit with the kids, Mia hugged her tightly, whispering, "I miss you, Mom." It was the first crack in the wall between them. Emily held her close, vowing to keep fighting, not just for her kids, but for herself. The consequences of her choices were heavy, but they were hers to carry, and she wasn't giving up. The Austin sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the community center where Emily volunteered. She stood at the front of a small room, leading a support group for women navigating divorce, her voice steady as she shared her story. 2 years had passed since her marriage imploded, and the woman who once crumbled under guilt now stood tall, helping others find their way. But the scars of her choices lingered, and tonight, as she drove home, she knew the final chapter of her reckoning was still unfolding. Emily's life had settled into a fragile new rhythm. Her job as a teacher's aide at a local elementary school gave her stability, and her volunteer work at the community center offered purpose. She'd fought hard for unsupervised visits with Mia and Ethan, now 10 and 8, and those weekends were her lifeline. They'd bake together, play board games, or watch old movies, slowly rebuilding the trust she'd fractured. But the kids still spent most of their time with Mark and Laura, whose apartment was now their primary home. Emily felt the distance, a quiet ache that never fully faded. Her affair with Diego was a distant memory, a mistake she'd dissected in therapy. She'd learned to forgive herself, not for the betrayal, but for losing sight of who she was. The community's judgment had softened over time. Some parents at school even started greeting her again, but the label of the one who cheated stuck. She carried it quietly, focusing on her kids and her work. Yet, whispers about Mark's new life reached her, painting a picture that felt eerily familiar. Mark, now 37, had settled into his relationship with Laura with the same ease he'd once shown with Emily. At first, Laura's warmth and energy seemed to balance his detachment. She threw herself into caring for Mia and Ethan, planning outings and helping with school projects. But Mark's old habits resurfaced. He'd come home from his tech job, drop his bag, and collapse onto the couch, his phone or TV consuming his attention. Laura's requests for help, whether with dishes or the kids' bedtime, were met with shrugs or half-hearted promises. "I'm wiped," he'd say, leaving her to handle everything. Laura's frustration grew, but Mark didn't notice. He was too comfortable, too blind to the cracks forming. By the one-year mark of their relationship, Laura was spending late nights texting a coworker, her laughter soft and secretive as she sat in their shared bedroom. The coworker, a project manager from her office, listened to her, asked about her day, and offered the attention Mark withheld. She didn't cross any lines. Not yet, but the seeds were planted, mirroring the path Emily had once taken. Emily caught glimpses of this through the kids. Mia mentioned Laura's new friend who sent her funny memes, and Ethan said Laura seemed sad sometimes. Emily didn't pry, but the irony wasn't lost on her. Mark was repeating the same mistakes, oblivious to the consequences. She felt no satisfaction, only a quiet resolve to focus on her own path. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was hers, built from the ground up through hard-won lessons. One Saturday, during a visit with the kids, Emily got a call from her lawyer. Mark was pushing for full custody again, claiming her part-time job and small apartment weren't stable enough. The news hit like a blow, but Emily didn't panic. She'd faced worse. She met with her lawyer, gathered pay stubs, and secured a letter from her therapist attesting to her progress. At the hearing, she stood before the judge, her voice clear. "I made mistakes," she said, "but I'm here for my kids. I've rebuilt my life to be the mother they deserve." The judge denied Mark's request, granting Emily more visitation time. It wasn't a victory over Mark. It was a victory for herself. That evening, she took Mia and Ethan to a local park. As they kicked a soccer ball, laughing and chasing each other, Emily felt a peace she hadn't known in years. She wasn't the woman who'd lost herself in a failing marriage or a fleeting affair. She was a mother, a survivor, someone who'd turned her pain into purpose. At the community center, she'd started mentoring a young woman, Sarah, who was escaping a neglectful marriage. Helping Sarah navigate the legal system and find her footing felt like paying forward the strength Emily had found. Mark's world, meanwhile, began to fray. Laura confronted him one night after he ignored her plea to help with Ethan's science project. "I can't keep doing this alone," she said, her voice sharp. Mark brushed it off, assuming she'd stay, just as Emily had for years. But Laura wasn't Emily. She moved out a month later, taking her warmth and energy with her. The coworker she'd been texting was there to help her pack, a quiet presence that Mark didn't even notice until it was too late. He was left with the kids, a silent apartment, and the same couch he'd buried himself in for years. Emily heard about the breakup through Mia, who mentioned Laura's absence with a shrug. "Dad's quiet again," she said. Emily nodded, keeping her thoughts to herself. She didn't wish Mark ill, but she saw the justice in it, a natural consequence of his unchanged ways. He'd won the divorce, the custody, the community's sympathy, but he couldn't outrun himself. 2 years after the divorce, Emily's life was steady. She'd save enough to move into a bigger apartment, one with space for the kids to have their own rooms during visits. Her volunteer work expanded, and she was training to lead more support groups. Mia and Ethan's laughter filled her weekends, their bond growing stronger with each visit. They still loved their dad, but they looked to Emily for the warmth and presence Mark couldn't give. As she drove home from the community center one evening, Emily glanced at the Austin skyline, the city lights a reminder of how far she'd come. She'd betrayed her marriage, yes, but she'd also betrayed herself. Now, she was reclaiming both. The moral wasn't in Mark's loss or Laura's departure. It was in Emily's choice to rebuild, to face her mistakes, and to help others do the same. She wasn't perfect, but she was enough.